the marks we make on the wall. That's our favorite time of year. Merry Christmas from Chiron Beta Prime, where we're working in a mine for our robot overlords. Did I say overlords? I meant protectors. Merry Christmas from Chiron Beta Prime. They tried to decorate and make it look more Christmassy, but what they did looks more like Christmas in hell. They nailed a Santa to a cross in front of everyone. It wasn't pleasant, but I'm sure they meant well. And the rocks outside the airlock exude ammonia-scented snow. It's like a winter wonderland. Merry Christmas from Chiron Beta Prime, where we're working in a mine for our robot overlords. Did I say overlords? I meant protectors. Merry Christmas from Chiron Beta Prime. That's all the family news that we're allowed to talk about. We really hope you'll come and visit us soon. I mean, we're literally begging you to visit us and make it quick before they...
Message redacted.
Now it's time for Christmas dinner. I think the robot sent us a pie. You know I love my Soylent Green. Merry Christmas from Chiron Beta Prime, where we're working in a mine for our robot overlords. Did I say overlords? I meant protectors. Merry Christmas, Chiron Beta Prime.
Alrighty. Season's greetings from Chiron Beta Prime by Jonathan Colton. Jonathan Colton. He's not my favorite artist in the world, but I give him a lot of credit for being there. So yeah, welcome back to another thrilling installment of now we're calling it Free Read Fridays, because it's not on Saturday anymore. So yay! I'm gonna keep with the same episode count as the other because it is the same in spirit. At any rate, is that centered? It can go down a little, but it won't make much difference. Yeah. Thrilling you with an image of Saturn Claus P10. One of Dr. Hell's most nefarious minions that he throws against the valiant black-armored Messenger Z. So yeah. I got a collection of short stories that are relatively festive, so hooray you guys. Everybody benefits for the greater good. Which is good. We like the greater good. It is round and toasty. Sometimes. So, once this catches up with me and the program loads, come on. Yes, let me regale you with stories. Oh my god. Okay. So I don't actually know where I'm going to start. And that's where the trouble begins, really, because I don't know where I'm beginning. But I have an assortment of stories here. I've got, so I figure I'll probably start with, well, I could do Christmas on Ganymede first. It's a longish one. The others, for the most part, are short. So another thing I should note is most of these are basically blind reads, or I read them so long ago that I don't even remember how they go. A bunch of these are suggestions from other people. whom I try to keep in contact with, who have, festive short stories on the mind and in the brain. For instance, Christmas on Ganymede. I've never read it, not knowingly. It's by Isaac Asimov. And it is a short story. Other short stories I have today are The Star by Arthur C. Clarke, which is very good and I have read before. But it's bit of a Debbie Downer of short stories. Is not necessarily most positive outlook. Not necessarily positive, but is good nonetheless. I also have The Season of Forgiveness, which is relatively short. And I hope I'm not going to have to sing because I can't remember my basic Christmas carols anymore. It's been so long. I also have The Gift by Ray Bradbury, which is fairly charming. It's very much in this of the season. And then I've got a whole nother one which I want to read, but odds are I won't have time. But I do very much want to read if I can get away with it. Called Overtime. Uh, Part of me wants to lead with that one, but then I'm like, that's gonna take it's gonna take a while to get through. So I'll start off with, I'll start off with Christmas on Ganymede. Why not? If we're gonna do it blind, we might as well do it blind. Okay. And I have to do this in front of my computer too, because I do not have physical copies of most of these. I always do them in front of my computer, but sometimes I'm able to be off to the side. Alrighty. So I hope you're warm, toasty, snuggled up with some eggnog or family members or uh, some hot cocoa or, I don't know, Soylent Green, and are enjoying as much of the season as you can. The one day off you get a year if you work retail. Uh, and hopefully this will transport you from your cares and woes into somewhere else or something else. A different state of being and mind. Christmas on Ganymede by Isaac Asimov. Olaf Johnson hummed nasally to himself, and his china blue eyes were dreamy as he surveyed the stately fir tree in the corner of the library. Though the library was the largest single room in the dome, Olaf felt it none too spacious for the occasion. Enthusiastically, he dipped into the huge crate at his side and took out the first roll of red and green crepe paper. What sudden burst of sentiment had inspired the Ganymedian Products Corporation, Incorporated, to ship a complete collection of Christmas decorations to the dome, he did not pause to inquire. Olaf's was a placid disposition, and in his self-imposed job as chief Christmas decorator, he was content with his lot. He frowned suddenly and muttered a curse. The General Assembly signal light was hashing on and off hysterically. With a hurt air, Olaf laid down the tack hammer he had just lifted, then the roll of crepe paper, picked some tinsel out of his hair, and left for officers' quarters. Commander Scott Pelham was in his deep armchair at the head of the table when Olaf entered. His stubby fingers were drumming unrhythmically upon the glass-topped table. Olaf met the commander's hotly furious eyes without fear, for nothing had gone wrong in his department in 20 Ganymedean revolutions. The room filled rapidly with men, and Pelham's eyes hardened as he counted noses in one sweeping glance. "We're all here. Men, we face a crisis." There was a vague stir. Olaf's eyes sought the ceiling, and he relaxed. Crises hit the dome once a revolution, on the average. Usually they turned out to be a sudden rise in the quota of oxytato to be gathered, or the inferior quality of the last batch of Karen leaves. He stiffened, however, at the next words. "In connection with the crisis, I have one question to ask." Pelham's voice was a deep baritone, and it rasped unpleasantly when he was angry. "What dirty, imbecilic troublemaker has been telling those blasted Aussies fairy tales?" Olaf cleared his throat nervously, and thus immediately became the center of attention. His Adam's apple wobbled in sudden alarm, and his forehead wrinkled into a washboard. He shivered. I, he stuttered, quickly fell silent. His long fingers made a bewildered gesture of appeal. I mean, I was out there yesterday after the last supplies of Karen leaves on account the Aussies were slow, and... A deceptive sweetness entered Pelham's voice. He smiled. "Did you tell those natives about Santa Claus, Olaf?" The smile looked uncommonly like a wolfish leer, and Olaf broke down. He nodded convulsively. "Oh, you did? Well, you told them about Santa Claus. He comes down in a sleigh that flies through the air with 8 reindeer pulling it. Well, doesn't he?" Olaf asked unhappily. "And you drew pictures of the reindeer just to make sure there was no mistake. Also, he has a long white beard and red clothes with white trimmings." "Yeah, that's right," said Olaf, his face puzzled. "And he has a big bag chock full of presents for good little boys and girls, and he brings it down the chimney and puts presents inside stockings." Sure." "You also told them he's about due, didn't you? One more revolution and he's going to visit us." Olaf smiled weakly. "Yeah, Commander, I meant to tell you. I'm fixing up the tree and—" "Shut up!" The commander was breathing hard in a whistling sort of way. "Do you know what those Aussies have thought of?" "No, Commander." Pelham leaned across the table toward Olaf and shouted, "They want Santa Claus to visit them!" Someone laughed, and it changed it quickly to a strangling cough at the commander's raging stare. "And if Santa Claus doesn't visit them, the Aussies are going to quit work." He repeated, "Quit cold strike." There was no laughter, strangled or otherwise, after that. If there were more than one thought among the entire group, it didn't show itself. Olaf expressed that thought. But what about the quota?" "Well, what about it?" snarled Pelham. "Do I have to draw pictures for you? Ganymedean Products has to get 100 tons of wolframite, 80 tons of Karen leaves, and 50 tons of oxite every year, or it loses its franchise. I suppose there isn't anyone here who doesn't know that. It so happens that the current year ends in 2 Ganymedean revolutions, and we're 5% behind schedule as it is." There was pure, horrified silence. "And now the Aussies won't work unless they get Santa Claus. No work, no quota, no franchise, no jobs. Get that, you low-grade morons. When the company loses its franchise, we lose the best-paying jobs in the system. Kiss them goodbye, men, unless—" He paused, glared steadily at Olaf, and added, Unless, by next revolution, we have a flying sleigh, 8 reindeer, and a Santa Claus. And by every cosmic speck in the rings of Saturn, we're going to have just that, especially a Santa. 10 faces turned ghastly pale. Got someone in mind, Commander? Asked someone in a voice that was 3/4 croak. Yes, as a matter of fact, I have. He sprawled back in his chair. Olaf Johnson broke into a sudden sweat as he found himself staring at the end of a pointing forefinger. Aw, Commander, he quavered. The pointing finger never moved. Pelham tramped into the foreroom, removed his oxygen nosepiece, and the cold cylinders attached to it one by one. He cast off his thick woolen outer garments and, with a final weary sigh, jerked off a pair of heavy knee-high space boots. Sim Pierce paused in his careful inspection of the latest batch of Karen leaves and cast a hopeful glance over his spectacles. Well, Pelham shrugged. I promised them Santa. What else could I do? I also doubled sugar rations, so they're back on the job for the moment. You mean till the Santa we promised doesn't show up? Pierce straightened and waved a long Karen leaf in the commander's face for emphasis. This is the silliest thing I ever heard of. It can't be done. There ain't no Santa Claus. Try telling that to the Aussies. Pelham slumped into a chair, and his expression became stonily bleak. What's Benson doing? You mean that flying sleigh he says he can rig up? Pierce held a leaf up to the light and peered at it critically. He's a crackpot, if you ask me. The old buzzard went down to the sub-level this morning, and he's been there ever since. All I know is he's taken the spare electro-dissociator apart. If anything happens to the regular, it just means that we're without oxygen. Well, Pelham rose heavily. For my part, I hope we do choke. It would be an easy way out of this whole mess. I'm going down below. He stumped out and slammed the door behind him. In the sub-level, he gazed about in bewilderment, for the room was littered with gleaming chrome steel machine parts. It took him some time to recognize the mess as the remains of what had been a compact, snugly built electro-dissociator the day before. In the center, in anachronistic contrast, stood a dusty wooden sleigh atop rust-red runners. From beneath it came the sound of hammering. Hey, Benson! Called Pelham. A grimy, sweat-streaked face pushed out from underneath the sleigh, and a stream of tobacco juice shot toward Benson's ever-present cuspidor. What are you shouting like that for? He complained. This is delicate work. What the devil is that weird contraption? Demanded Pelham. Flying sleigh. My own idea, too. The light of enthusiasm shone in Benson's watery eyes, and the quid in his mouth shifted from cheek to cheek as he spoke. The sleigh was brought here in the old days, when they thought Ganymede was covered with snow, like the other Jovian moons. All I have to do is fix a few gravo-repulsors from the dissociator to the bottom, and that'll make it weightless when the current's on. Compressed air jets'll do the rest. The commander chewed his lower lip dubiously. Will it work? Sure it will. Lots of people have thought of using repulsors in air travel, but they're inefficient, especially in heavy gravity fields. Here on Ganymede, with a field of 1/3 gravity and a thin atmosphere, a child could run it. Even Johnson could run it, though I wouldn't mourn if he fell off and broke his blasted neck. All right then, look here. We've got lots of this native purplewood. Get Charlie Finn and tell him to put that sleigh on a platform of it. He's to have it extend about 20 feet or more frontward, with a railing around the part that projects. Benson spat and scowled through the stringy hair over his eyes. What's the idea, Commander? Pelham's laughter came in short, harsh barks. Those Aussies are expecting reindeer, and reindeer they're going to have. Those animals will have to stand on something, won't they? Sure, but wait, hold on. There aren't any reindeer on Ganymede. Commander Pelham paused on his way out. His eyes narrowed unpleasantly, as they always did when he thought of Olaf Johnson. Olaf is out rounding up 8 spiny-backs for us. They've got 4 feet, a head on one end, and a tail on the other. That's close enough for the Aussies. The old engineer chewed this information and chuckled nastily. Good. I wish the fool the joy of his job. So do I, gritted Pelham. He stalked out as Benson, still leering, slid underneath the sleigh. The commander's description of a spiny-back was concise and accurate, but it left out several interesting details. For one thing, a spiny-back has a long, mobile snout, 2 ears that wave back and forth gently, and 2 emotional purple eyes. The males have pliable spines of a deep crimson color along the backbone that seem to delight the female of the species. Combine these with a scaly, muscular tail and a brain by no means mediocre, and you have a spiny-back. Or at least you have one, if you can catch one. It was just such a thought that occurred to Olaf Johnson as he sneaked down from the rocky eminence toward the herd of 25 spiny-backs grazing on the sparse, gritty undergrowth. The nearest spinies looked up as Olaf, bundled in fur and grotesque with attached oxygen nosepiece, approached. However, spinies have no natural enemies, so they merely gazed at the figure with languidly disapproving eyes and returned to their crunchy but nourishing fare. Olaf's notions on bagging big game were sketchy. He fumbled in his pocket for a lump of sugar, held it out, and said, "Here, pussy, 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 pussy." The ears of the nearest spiny twitched in annoyance. Olaf came closer and held out the sugar again. "Come, bossy, come, bossy." The spiny caught sight of the sugar and rolled his eyes at it. His snout twitched as he spat out his last mouthful of vegetation and ambled over. With neck stretched out, he sniffed. Then, using a rapid, expert motion, he struck at the outheld palm and flipped the lump into his mouth. Sorry. Olaf's other hand whistled down upon nothingness. With a hurt expression, Olaf held out another piece. "Here, Prince! Here, Fido!" The spiny made a low, tremulous sound deep in its throat. It was a sound of pleasure. Evidently, this strange monstrosity before him, having gone insane, intended to feed him these bits of concentrated succulence forever. He snatched, and was back as quickly as the first time. But, since Olaf had held on firmly this time, the spiny almost bagged half a finger as well. Olaf's yell but lacked a bit of the nonchalance necessary at such times. Nevertheless, a bite that can be felt through thick gloves is a bite. He advanced boldly upon the spiny. There are some things that stir the Johnson blood and bring up the ancient spirit of the Vikings. Having one's finger bitten, especially by an unearthly animal, is one of these. There was an uncertain look in the spiny's eyes as he backed slowly away. There weren't any white cubes being offered any more, and he wasn't quite sure what was going to happen now. The uncertainty vanished with a suddenness he did not expect, when 2 glove-muffled hands came down upon his ears and jerked. He let out a high-pitched yelp and charged forward. A spiny has a certain sense of dignity. He doesn't like to have his ears pulled, particularly when other spinies, including several unattached females, have formed a ring and are looking on. The Earthman went over backward and remained in that position for a while. Meantime, the spiny backed away a few feet in a gentlemanly manner and allowed Johnson to get to his feet. The old Viking blood frothed still higher in Olaf. After rubbing the hurt spot where he had landed on his oxygen cylinder, he jumped, forgetting to allow for Ganymedian gravity. He sailed 5 feet over the spiny's back. There was awe in the animal's eye as he watched Olaf, for it was a stately jump. But there was a certain amount of bewilderment as well. There seemed to be no purpose to the maneuver. Olaf landed on his back again and got the cylinder in the same place. He was beginning to feel a little embarrassed. The sounds that came from the circle of onlookers were remarkably like snickers.
Laugh, he muttered bitterly. I haven't even begun to fight yet.
He approached the spiny slowly, cautiously. He circled, watching for his opening. So did the spiny. Olaf feinted, and the spiny ducked. Then the spiny reared, and Olaf ducked. Olaf kept remembering new profanity all the time. The husky "grrrr" that came out of the spiny's throat seemed to lack the brotherly spirit that is usually associated with Christmas. There was a sudden swishing sound. Olaf felt something collide with his skull, just behind his left ear. This time he turned a back somersault and landed on the nape of his neck. There was a chorused whinny from the onlookers, and the spiny waved his tail triumphantly. Olaf got rid of the impression that he was floating through a star-studded unlimited space and wavered to his feet.
Listen, he objected. Using your tail is a foul.
He leaped back as the tail shot forward again, then flung himself forward in a diving tackle. He grabbed at the spiny's feet and felt the animal come down on his back with an indignant yelp. Now it was a case of earth muscles against Ganymedean muscles, and Olaf became a man of brute strength. He struggled up, and the spiny found himself slung over the stranger's shoulders. The spiny objected vociferously, and tried to prove his objections by a judicious whip of the tail. But he was in an inconvenient position, and the stroke whistled harmlessly over Olaf's head. The other spinies made way for the Earthman with saddened expressions. Evidently, they were all good friends of the captured animal, and hated to see him lose a fight. They returned to their meal in philosophic resignation, plainly convinced that it was kismet. On the other side of the rocky ledge, Olaf reached his prepared cave. There was the briefest of scrambling struggles before he managed to sit down hard on the spiny's head and put enough knots into rope to hold him there. A few hours later, when he had corralled his 8th spiny back, he possessed the technique that comes of long practice. He could have given a terrestrial cowboy valuable pointers on throwing a maverick. Also, he could have given a terrestrial stevedore lessons in simple and compound swearing. 'Twas the night before Christmas, and all through the Ganymedean dome there was deafening noise and bewildering excitement, like an exploding nova equipped for sound. Around the rusty sleigh, mounted on its huge platform of purple wood, 5 Earthmen were staging a battle royale with a spiny. The spiny had definite views about most things, and one of his stubbornest and most definite views was that he would never go where he didn't want to go. He made that clear by flailing 1 head, 1 tail, 3 spines, and 4 legs in every possible direction, with all possible force. But the Earthmen insisted, and not gently. Despite loud, agonized squeaks, the spiny was lifted onto the platform, hauled into place, and harnessed into hopeless helplessness.
Okay, Peter Benson yelled. Pass the bottle.
Holding the spiny's snout with one hand, Benson waved the bottle under it with the other. The spiny quivered eagerly and whined tremulously. Benson poured some of the liquid down the animal's throat. There was a gurgling swallow and an appreciative whinny. The spiny's neck stretched out for more. Benson sighed.
Our best brandy, too.
He upended the bottle and withdrew it half empty. The spiny, eyes whirling in their sockets rapidly, did what seemed an attempt at a gay jig. It didn't last long, however, for Ganymedean metabolism is almost immediately affected by alcohol. His muscles locked in a drunken rigor, and with a loud hiccup, he went out on his feet.
Drag out the next,
yelled Benson. In an hour, the 8 spinybacks were so many cataleptic statues. Forked sticks were tied around their heads as antlers. The effect was crude and sketchy, but it would do. As Benson opened his mouth to ask where Olaf Johnson was, that worthy showed up in the arms of 3 comrades, and he was putting up as stiff a fight as any spiny. His objections, however, were highly articulate.
I'm not going anywhere in this costume, he roared, gouging at the nearest eye. You hear me?
There certainly was cause for objection. Even at his best, Olaf had never been a heartthrob. But in his present condition, he resembled a hybrid between a spiny's nightmare and a Picassian conception of a patriarch. He wore the conventional costume of Santa. His clothes were as red tissue paper sewed onto his space coat could make it. Oh, let me reread that. His clothes were as red tissue paper sewed onto his space coat could make it. The ermine was as white as cotton wool, which it was. His beard, more cotton wool glued into a linen foundation, hung loosely from his ears. With that below and his oxygen nose-piece above, even the strongest were forced to avert their eyes. Olaf had not been shown a mirror, but between what he could see of himself and what his instinct told him, he would have greeted a good, bright lightning bolt like a brother. By fits and starts, he was hauled to the sleigh. Others pitched in to help, until Olaf was nothing but a smothered squirm and muffled voice.
"Leggo!"
he mumbled.
"Leggo and come at me one by one! Come on!"
He tried to spar a bit, to point his dare, but the multiple grips upon him left him unable to wriggle a finger.
Get in, ordered Benson. You go to hell, gasped Olaf. I'm not getting into any patented shortcut to suicide, and you can take your bloody flying sleigh and...
Listen, interrupted Benson.
Commander Pelham is waiting for you at the other end. He'll skin you alive if you don't show up in half an hour. Commander Pelham can take the sleigh sideways and... Then think of your job. Think of 150 a week. Think of every other year off with pay. Think of Hilda back on Earth who isn't going to marry you without a job. Think of all that.
Johnson thought, snarled. He thought some more, got into the sleigh, strapped down his bag, and turned on the gravo-repulsors. With a horrible curse, he opened the rear jet. The sleigh dashed forward, and he caught himself from going backward, over and out of the sleigh, by 2/3 of a whisker. He held on to the sides thereafter, watching the surrounding hills as they rose and fell with each lurch of the unsteady sleigh. As the wind rose, the undulations grew more marked, and when Jupiter came up, its yellow light brought out every jag and crag of the rocky ground, toward every one of which, in turn, the sleigh seemed headed. And by the time the giant planet had shoved completely over to the horizon, the curse of drink which departs from the Ganymedian organism just as quickly as it descends, began removing itself from the spinies. The hindmost spiny came out of it first, tasted the inside of his mouth, winced, and swore off drink. Having made that resolution, he took in his immediate surroundings languidly. They made no immediate impression on him. Only gradually was the fact forced upon him that his footing, whatever it was not the usual stable one of solid Ganymede. It swayed and shifted, which seemed very unusual. Yet he might have attributed this unsteadiness to his recent orgy, had he not been so careless as to drop his glance over the railing to which he was anchored. No Spiny ever died of heart failure, as far as recorded, but, looking downward, this one almost did. His agonized screech of horror and despair brought the other Spinies into a full, if headachy, consciousness. For a while there was a confused blur of squawking conversations as the animals tried to get the pain out of their heads and the facts in. Both aims were achieved, and a stampede was organized. It wasn't much of a stampede because the Spinies were anchored tightly, but, except for the fact that they got nowhere, they went through all the motions of a full gallop, and the sleigh went crazy. Olaf grabbed his beard a second before it let go of his ears. "Hey!" he shouted. It was something like saying "tut tut" to a hurricane. The sleigh kicked, bucked, and did a hysterical tango. It made sudden spurts, as if inspired to dash its wooden brains out against Ganymede's crust. Meanwhile, Olaf prayed, swore, wept, and jiggled all the compressed air jets at once. Ganymede whirled, and Jupiter was a wild blur. Perhaps it was the spectacle of Jupiter doing the shimmy that steadied the Spinies. More likely, it was the fact that they just didn't give a hang anymore. Whatever it was, they halted, made lofty farewell speeches to one another, confessed their sins, and waited for death. The sleigh steadied, and Olaf resumed his breathing once more, only to stop again as he viewed the curious spectacle of hills and solid ground up above, and black sky and swollen Jupiter down below. It was at this point that he, too, made his peace with the Eternal and awaited the end. Aussie is short for ostrich, and that's what the native Ganymedans look like, except that their necks are shorter, their heads are larger, and their feathers look as if they were about to fall out by the roots. To this, add a pair of scrawny, feathered arms with 3 stubby fingers apiece. They can speak English, but when you hear them, you wish you couldn't. There were 50 of them in the low purple wood structure that was their meeting hall. On the mound of raised dirt in the front of the room, dark with the smoky dimness of burning purple wood torches, fetid to boot, sat Commander Scott Pelham and 5 of his men. Before them strutted the frowsiest Aussie of them all, inflating his huge chest with rhythmic, booming sounds. He stopped for a moment and pointed to a ragged hole in the ceiling.
Look!
He squawked.
Chimney! We make! Santa Claus come in!
Pelham grunted approval. The Aussie clucked happily. He pointed to the little sacks of woven grass that hung from the walls.
Look! Stockies! Santa Claus put presents!
Yeah, said Pelham unenthusiastically. Chimney and stockings. Very nice. He spoke out of the corner of his mouth to Sim Pierce, who sat next to him. Another half hour in this dump will kill me. When's that fool coming? Pierce stirred uneasily. Listen, he said. I've been doing some figuring. We're safe on everything but the car and leaves, and we're still 4 tons short on that if we can get this fool business over with in the next hour, so we can start the next shift and work the Aussies at double. We can make it. So if we can start the next shift and work the Aussies at double, we can make it. He leaned back. Yes, I think we can make it. Just about, replied Pelham gloomily. That's if Johnson gets here without pulling another bloomer. The Aussie was talking again, for Aussies like to talk. He said,
Every year Christmas comes. Christmas nice. Everybody friendly. Aussie like Christmas. You like Christmas?
Yeah, fine, Pelham snarled politely. peace on Ganymede, goodwill toward men, especially Johnson. Where the devil is that idiot, anyhow? He fell into an annoyed fidget, while the Aussie jumped up and down a few times in a thoughtful sort of manner, evidently for the exercise of it. He continued the jumping, varying it with little hopping dance steps, till Pelham's fists began making strangling gestures. Only an excited squawk from the hole in the wall, dignified by the term window, kept Pelham from committing Aussie slaughter. Aussies swarmed about, and the Earthmen fought for a view. Against Jupiter's great yellowness was outlined a flying sleigh, complete with reindeers. It was only a tiny thing, but there was no doubt about it. Santa Claus was coming. There was only one thing wrong with the picture. The sleigh, reindeer and all, while plunging ahead at a terrific speed, was flying upside down. The Aussies dissolved into squawking cacophony.
Santa Claus, Santa Claus, Santa Claus.
They scrambled out the window like so many animated dust mops gone mad. Pelham and his men used the low door. The sleigh was approaching, growing larger, lurching from side to side and vibrating like an off-center flywheel. Olaf Johnson was a tiny figure, holding on desperately to the side of the sleigh with both hands. Pelham was shouting wildly, incoherently, choking on the thin atmosphere every time he forgot to breathe through his nose. Then he stopped and stared in horror. The sleigh, almost life-size now, was dipping down. If it had been an arrow shot by William Tell, it could not have aimed between Pelham's eyes more accurately. "Everybody down!" he shrieked, and dropped. The wind of the sleigh's passage whistled keenly and brushed his face. Olaf's voice could be heard for an instant, high-pitched and indistinct. Compressed air spurted, leaving tracks of condensing water vapor. Pelham lay quivering, hugging Ganymede's frozen crusts. Then, knees shaking like a Hawaiian hula girl, he rose slowly. The Aussies, who had scattered before the plunging vehicle, had assembled again. Off in the distance, the sleigh was veering back. Pelham watched as it swayed and hovered, still rotating. It lurched toward the dome, curved off to one side, turned back, and gathered speed. Inside that sleigh, Olaf worked like a demon. Straddling his legs wide, he shifted his weight desperately. Sweating and cursing, trying hard not to look downward at Jupiter, he urged the sleigh into wilder and wilder swings. It was wobbling through an angle of 180 degrees now, and Olaf felt his stomach raise strenuous objections. Holding his breath, he leaned hard with his right foot and felt the sleigh swing far over. At the extremity of that swing, he released the gravo-repulsor, and, in Ganymede's weak gravity, the sleigh jerked downward. Naturally, since the vehicle was bottom-heavy due to the metal gravo-repulsor beneath, it righted itself as it fell. But this was little comfort to Commander Pelham, who found himself once more in the direct path of the sleigh. "Down!" he yelled, and dropped again. The sleigh whished overhead, came up against a huge boulder with a crack, bounced 25 feet into the air, came down with a rush and a bang, and Olaf fell over the railing and out. Santa Claus had arrived. With a deep, shuddering breath, Olaf swung his bag over his shoulders, adjusted his beard, and patted one of the silently suffering Spinies on the head. Death might be coming. In fact, Olaf could hardly wait, but he was going to die on his feet nobly, like a Johnson. Inside the shack, into which the Aussies had once more swarmed, a thump announced the arrival of Santa's bag on the roof, and a second thud the arrival of Santa himself. A ghastly face appeared through the makeshift hole in the ceiling.
"Merry Christmas!" it croaked, and tumbled through.
Olaf landed on his oxygen cylinders, as usual, and got them in the usual place. The Aussies jumped up and down like rubber balls with the itch. Olaf limped heavily toward the first stocking and deposited the garishly colored sphere he withdrew from his bag, one of the many that had originally been intended as a Christmas tree ornament. One by one, he deposited the rest in every available stocking. Having completed his job, he dropped into an exhausted squat, from which position he watched the subsequent proceedings with a glazed and fishy eye. The jolliness and belly-shaking good humor traditionally characteristic of Santa Claus were absent from this one with remarkable thoroughness. The Aussies made up for it by their wild ecstasy. Until Olaf had deposited the last globe, they had kept their silence and their seats. But when he had finished, the air heaved and writhed under the stresses of the discordant screeches that arose. In half a second, the hand of each Aussie contained a globe. They chattered among themselves furiously, handling the globes carefully and hugging them close to their chests. Then they compared one with another, flocking about to gaze at particularly good ones. The frowsiest Aussie approached Pelham and plucked at the commander's sleeve.
Santa Claus good,
he cackled.
Look, he leave eggs.
He stared reverently at his sphere and said,
Prettier 'n Aussie eggs. Must be Santa Claus eggs, huh?
His skinny finger punched Pelham in the stomach. "No!" yowled Pelham vehemently. "Hell no!" But the Aussie wasn't listening. He plunged the globe deep into the warmth of his feathers and said,
Pretty collars. How long take for little Santa Claus come out? And what little Santa Claus eat?
He looked up.
We take good care. We teach little Santa Claus and make him smart and full of brain like Aussie.
Pierce grabbed Commander Pelham's arm.
"Don't argue with them," he whispered frantically. "What do you care if they think those are Santa Claus eggs? Come on, if we work like maniacs, we can still make the quota. Let's get started."
"That's right," Pelham admitted. He turned to the Aussie. "Tell everyone to get going." He spoke clearly and loudly. "Work now. Do you understand? Hurry, hurry, hurry. Come on." He motioned with his arms, but the frowsy Aussie had come to a sudden halt. He said slowly,
We work, but Johnson say Christmas come every year.
"Isn't one Christmas enough for you?" Pelham rasped.
No,
squawked the Aussie.
we want Santa Claus next year. Get more eggs. And next year, more eggs. And next year, and next year, and next year, more eggs. More little Santa Claus eggs. If Santa Claus not come, we not work.
"That's a long time off," said Pelham. "We'll talk about it then. By that time, I'll either have gone completely crazy, or you'll have forgotten all about it." Pierce opened his mouth, closed it, opened his mouth, closed it, opened it, and finally managed to speak. "Commander, they want him to come every year." "I know. They won't remember by next year, though." "But you don't get it. A year to them is one Ganymedean revolution around Jupiter. In Earth time, that's 7 days and 3 hours. They want Santa Claus to come every week." "Every week?" Pelham gulped. "Johnson told them—" For a moment, everything turned sparkling somersaults before his eyes. He choked, and automatically his eye sought Olaf. Olaf turned cold to the marrow of his bones, and rose to his feet apprehensively, sliding toward the door. There he stopped, as a sudden recollection of tradition hit him. Beard a-dangle, he croaked, "Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night." He made for the sleigh as if all the imps of Hades were after him. The imps weren't, but Commander Scott Pelham was. The end. And that was Christmas on Ganymede by Isaac Asimov.
Hilarious. It's upbeat and uplifting.
And just let me get this sorted real quick here. Where are those saved? There they are. Festive. Save. Oh no, that's Christmas on Ganymede. Shoot.
No.
Ganymede. Isaac Asimov. Okay. Next. We'll go with the. It's a bit of a downer, but the latter two will be less downer-y. Oh well, that took an hour. Okay, so I'm not gonna have time, I don't think, for the special one I wanted to do, but I might do that next week, just as kind of a aperitif. All right. Let me make sure this is working. Do 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 do. Do 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 do. No, don't do that. Come on. Please work with me here. Yes. Yes. Okay, good. That is working. It was acting up a little. Hi, Kazong. Thank you for tuning in. So this next one is by Arthur C. Clarke. It's called The Star. And the ending is a little it's a bit of a downer, but it's short and punchy. And then we'll have something very uplifting to counteract it. So you can go from like sugar low to diabetes or something. I don't know. Here we go. The Star by Arthur C. Clarke. It is 3,000 light years to the Vatican. Once I believed that space could have no power over faith, just as I believed that the heavens declared the glory of God's handiwork. Now I have seen that handiwork, and my faith is sorely troubled. I stare at the crucifix that hangs on the cabin wall above the Mark VI computer, and for the first time in my life I wonder if it is no more than an empty symbol. I have told no one yet, but the truth cannot be concealed. The data are there for anyone to read. Records on the countless miles of magnetic tape and the thousands of photographs we are carrying back to Earth. Other scientists can interpret them as easily as I can. More easily, in all probability. I am not one who would condone the tampering with the truth, which often gave my order a bad name in the olden days. The crew is already sufficiently depressed. I wonder how they will take this ultimate irony. Few of them have any religious faith, yet they will not relish using this final weapon in their campaign against me, that private, good-natured, but fundamentally serious war which lasted all the way from Earth. It amused them to have a Jesuit as chief astrophysicist. Dr. Chandler, for instance, could never get over it. Why are medical men such notorious atheists? Sometimes he would meet me on the observation deck, where the lights are always low, so that the stars would shine with undiminished glory. He would come up to me in the gloom and stand staring out at the great oval port while the heavens crawled slowly around us as the ship turned end over end with the residual spin we had never bothered to correct. "Well, father," he would say at last, "it goes on forever, and perhaps something has made it. But how you can believe that something has a special interest in us and our miserable little world? That just beats me." Then the argument would start, while the stars and nebulae would swing around us in whoop, now it's not working. Okay, good. In silent Then the argument would start, while the stars and nebulae would swing around us in silent, endless arcs, beyond the flawlessly clear plastic of the observation port. It was, I think, the apparent incongruity of my position which, yes, amused the crew. In vain I would point to my 3 papers in the Astrophysical Journal, my 5 in the monthly notices of the Royal Astronomical Society. I would remind them that our order has long been famous for its scientific works. We may be few now, but ever since the 18th century we have made contributions to astronomy and geophysics out of all proportion to our numbers. Will my report on the Phoenix Nebula end our 1,000 years of history? It will end, I fear, much more than that. I do not know who gave the nebula its name, which seems to me a very bad one. If it contains a prophecy, it is one which cannot be verified for several 1,000,000,000 years. Even the word nebula is misleading. This is a far smaller object than those stupendous clouds of mist, the stuff of unborn stars, which are scattered throughout the length of the Milky Way. On the cosmic scale, indeed, the Phoenix Nebula is a tiny thing, a tenuous shell of gas surrounding a single star, or what is left of a star. The Rubens engraving of Loyola seems to mock me as it hangs there above the spectrophotometer tracings. What would you, father, have made of this knowledge that has come into my keeping, so far from the little world that was all the universe you knew? Would your faith have risen to the challenge, as mine has failed to do? You gaze into the distance, father, but I have traveled a distance beyond any that you could have imagined when you founded our order 1,000 years ago. No other survey ship has been so far from Earth. We are at the very frontiers of the explored universe. We set out to reach the Phoenix Nebula. We succeeded, and we are homeward bound with our burden of knowledge. I wish I could lift that burden from my shoulders, but I call to you in vain across the centuries and the light years that lie between us. On the book you are holding the words that are you on the book you are holding the words are play that are what? On the book you are holding words that are plain to read. I can't read today. Ad maiorem Dei gloriam, the message runs. But it is a message I can no longer believe. Would you still believe it if you could see what we have found? We knew, of course, what the Phoenix Nebula was. Every year in our galaxy alone, more than 100 stars explode, blazing for a few hours or days with thousands of times their normal brilliance before they sink back into death and obscurity. Such are the ordinary novae, the commonplace disasters of the universe. I have recorded the spectrograms and light curves of dozens since I started working at the Lunar Observatory. But 3 or 4 times in every 1,000 years occurs something besides which even a nova pales into total insignificance. When a star becomes a supernova, it may for a little while outshine all the massed suns of the galaxy. The Chinese astronomers watched this happen in AD 1054, not knowing what it was they saw. 5 centuries later, in 1572, a supernova blazed in Cassiopeia so brilliantly that it was visible in the daylight sky. There have been 3 more in the 1,000 years that have passed since then. Our mission was to visit the remnants of such a catastrophe, to reconstruct the events that led up to it, and, if possible, to learn its cause. We came slowly in through the concentric shells of gas that had been blasted out 6,000 years before, yet were expanding still. They were immensely hot, radiating still with a fierce violet light, but far too tenuous to do us any damage. When the star had exploded, its outer layers had been driven upward with such speed that they had escaped completely from its gravitational field. Now they formed a hollow shell large enough to engulf 1,000 solar systems, and at its center burned the tiny, fantastic object which the star had now become. A white dwarf, smaller than the Earth, yet weighing 1,000,000 times as much. The glowing gas shells were all around us, banishing the normal night of interstellar space. We were flying into the center of a cosmic bomb that had detonated millennia ago, and whose incandescent fragments were still hurtling apart. The immense scale of the explosion, and the fact that the debris already covered a volume of space many billions of miles across, robbed the scene of any visible movement. It would take decades before the unaided eye could detect any motion in these tortured wisps and eddies of gas, yet the sense of turbulent expansion was overwhelming. We had checked our primary drive hours before, and were drifting slowly toward the fierce little star ahead. Once it had been a sun like our own, but it had squandered in a few hours the energy that should have kept it shining for 1,000,000 years. Now it was a shrunken miser, hoarding its resources as if trying to make amends for its prodigal youth. No one seriously expected to find planets. If there had been any before the explosion, they would have been boiled into puffs of vapor, and their substance lost in the greater wreckage of the star itself. But we made the automatic search, as always when approaching an unknown sun, and presently we found a single small world circling the star at an immense distance. It must have been the Pluto of this vanished solar system, orbiting on the frontiers of the night. Too far from the central sun ever to have known life, its remoteness had saved it from the fate of all its lost companions. The passing fires had seared its rocks and burned away the mantle of frozen gas that must have covered it in the days before the disaster. We landed, and we found the vault. Its builders had made sure that we would. The monolithic marker that stood above the entrance was now a fused stump, but even the first long-range photographs told us that here was the work of intelligence. A little later, we detected the continent-wide pattern of radioactivity that had been buried in the rock. Even if the pylon above the vault had been destroyed, this would have remained an immovable and all but eternal beacon calling to the stars. Our ship fell towards this gigantic bullseye like an arrow into its target. The pylon must have been a mile high when it was built, but now it looked like a candle that had melted down into a puddle of wax. It took us a week to drill through the fused rock, since we did not have the proper tools for a task like this. We were astronomers, not archaeologists, but we could improvise. Our original program was forgotten. This lonely monument, reared at such labor at the greatest possible distance from the doomed sun, could only have one meaning. A civilization, which knew it was about to die, had made its last bid for immortality. It will take us generations to examine all the treasures that were placed in the vault. They had plenty of time to prepare, for their sun must have given its first warnings many years before the final detonation. Everything that they wished to preserve, all the fruits of their genius, they brought here to this distant world in the days before the end, hoping that some other race would find them, and that they would be not utterly forgotten. They would not be utterly forgotten. If they only had a little more time! They could travel freely enough between the planets of their own sun, but they had not yet learned to cross the interstellar gulfs, and the nearest solar system was 100 light years away. Even if they had not been so disturbingly human as their sculpture shows, we could not have helped admiring them and grieving for their fate. They left thousands of visual records, and the machines for projecting them, together with elaborate pictorial instructions from which it will not be difficult to learn their written language. We have examined many of these records and brought to life, for the first time in 6,000 years, the warmth and beauty of a civilization which in many ways must have been superior to our own. Perhaps they only showed us the best, and one can hardly blame them. But their worlds were very lovely, and their cities were built with a grace that matches anything of ours. We have watched them at work and play, and listened to their musical speech sounding across the centuries. One scene is still before my eyes, a group of children on a beach of strange blue sand, playing in the waves as children play on earth. And, sinking into the sea, still warm and friendly and life-giving, is the sun that will soon turn traitor and obliterate all this innocent happiness. Perhaps if we had not been so far from home and so vulnerable to loneliness, we should not have been so deeply moved. Many of us had seen the ruins of ancient civilizations on other worlds, but they had never affected us so profoundly. This tragedy was unique. It was one thing for a race to fail and die, as nations and cultures have done on Earth, but to be destroyed so completely in the full flower of its achievement, leaving no survivors, how could that be reconciled with the mercy of God? My colleagues have asked me that, and I have given what answers I can. Perhaps you could have done better, Father Loyola, but I have found nothing in the Exercitia Spiritualia that helps me here. They were not an evil people. I do not know what gods they worshipped, if indeed they worshipped any. But I have looked back at them across the centuries, and have watched while the loveliness they used while what? And have watched while the loveliness they used their last strength to preserve was brought forth again and again into the light of the shrunken sun. I know the answers that my colleagues will give when they get back to Earth. They will say that the universe has no purpose and no plan, that since 100 suns explode every year in our galaxy, at this very moment some race is dying in the depths of space. Whether that race has done good or evil during its lifetime will make no difference in the end. There is no divine justice, for there is no God. Yet, of course, what we have seen proves nothing of the sort. Anyone who argues thus is being swayed by emotion, not logic. God has no need to justify his actions to man. He who built the universe can destroy it when he chooses. It is arrogance. It is perilously near blasphemy for us to say what he may or may not do. This I could have accepted, hard though it is to look upon whole worlds and peoples thrown into the furnace. But there comes a point when even the deepest faith must falter, and now, as I look at my calculations, I know I have reached that point at last. We could not tell, before we reached the nebula, how long ago the explosion took place. Now, from the astronomical evidence and the record in the rocks of that one surviving planet, I have been able to date it very exactly. I know in what year the light of this colossal conflagration reached Earth. I know how brilliantly the supernova whose corpse now dwindles behind our speeding ship once shone in terrestrial skies. I know how it must have blazed low in the east before sunrise, like a beacon in that oriental dawn. There can be no reasonable doubt. The ancient mystery is solved at last. Yet, oh God, there were so many stars you could have used. What was the need to give these people to the fire, that the symbol of their passing might shine above Bethlehem? And that was The Star by Arthur C. Clarke. Kind of a bummer. Oh yes, if there is a god, he basically burned an entire interstellar civilization or interplanetary civilization to the ground, uh, to make the supernova that appeared to be the Star of Bethlehem. It'd be funny, but it's, well, it depends on how religious you are, I guess. Something a little more heartwarming now, I figure. Let's see, what do I got here? I definitely have time for the gift. Whether I have time for the season of forgiveness, I am not sure. I do not think I'm going to have time for the season of forgiveness. That's okay. Excuse me. So this next one is The Gift by Ray Bradbury. It's a, I guess I'm ending it on a much more traditional Christmassy seasonal note. I would argue that it's a tad schmaltzy, and I have my own strong opinions on Christmas and how it is generally either depicted or celebrated by modern civilization. But those are my opinions and mine alone, and I see no need to share them at this time. So I will let The Gift do it instead. It doesn't necessarily share my views. It's kind of schmaltzy, but it's cute. Uplifting is the term I should use, I suppose. I can't vouch for the accuracy of this copy of the text. It looks a smidge dodgy, and it's a bit short, but I do have to scoot in like 15 minutes, so I'll be able to get it in at least. Because I have commitments. The Gift by Ray Bradbury. Tomorrow would be Christmas, and even while the three of them rode to the rocket port, the mother and father were that didn't take long. Tomorrow would be Christmas, and even while the three of them rode to the rocket port, the mother and father were worried. It was the boy's first flight into space, his very first time in a rocket, and they wanted everything to be perfect. So when, at the customs table, they were forced to leave behind his gift, which exceeded the weight limit by no more than a few ounces, and the little tree with the lovely white candles, they felt themselves deprived of the season and their love. The boy was waiting for them in the terminal room. Walking toward him, after their unsuccessful clash with the interplanetary officials, the mother and father whispered to each other, "What shall we do? Nothing, nothing. What can we do? Silly rules. And he so wanted the tree." The siren gave a great howl, and people pressed forward into the Mars rocket. The mother and father walked at the very last, their small pale son between them, silent. "I'll think of something," said the father.
What?
Asked the boy. And the rocket took off, and they were flung headlong into dark space. The rocket moved and left fire behind, and left Earth behind, on which the date was December 24th, 2052, heading out into a place where there was no time at all, no month, no year, no hour. They slept away the rest of the first day. Near midnight, by their Earth-time New York watches, the boy awoke and said,
I want to go look out the porthole.
There was only one port, a window of immensely thick glass of some size, up on the next deck. "Not quite yet," said the father. "I'll take you up later."
I want to see where we are and where we're going.
"I want you to wait for a reason," said the father. He had been lying awake, turning this way and that, thinking of the abandoned gift, the problem of the season, the lost tree, and the white candles. And at last, sitting up, no more than 5 minutes ago, he believed he had found a plan. He need only carry it out, and the journey would be fine and joyous indeed.
Son, he said, in exactly 1/2 hour it will be Christmas.
Oh, said the mother, dismayed that he had mentioned it. Somehow she had rather hoped that the boy would forget. The boy's face grew feverish, and his lips trembled.
I know. Will I get a present? Will I? Will I have a tree? Will I have a tree? You promised.
Yes, yes, all that and more, said the father.
The mother started.
But
I mean it, said the father. I really mean it. All and more, much more. Excuse me now, I'll be back.
He left them for about 20 minutes. When he came back, he was smiling.
Almost time.
can I hold your watch?
Asked the boy, and the watch was handed over, and he held it ticking in his fingers as the rest of the hour drifted by in fire and silence and unfelt motion.
It's Christmas now. Christmas. Where's me present?
Here we go,
Said the father, and took his boy by the shoulder and led him from the room, down the hall, up a rampway, his wife following. I don't understand, she kept saying.
You will. Here we are, said the father.
They had stopped at the closed door of a large cabin. The father tapped 3 times, and then twice in a code. The door opened, and the light in the cabin went out, and there was a whisper of voices.
Go in, son,
said the father.
It's dark.
I'll hold your hand. Come on, Mama.
They stepped into the room, and the door shut, and the room was very dark indeed. And before them loomed a great glass eye, the porthole, a window 4 feet high and 6 feet wide, from which they could look out into space. The boy gasped. Behind him, the father and the mother gasped with him, and then in the dark room some people began to sing.
Merry Christmas, son,
said the father. And the voices in the room sang the familiar carols, and the boy moved slowly until his face was pressed against the cool glass of the port. And he stood there for a long, long time, just looking and looking out into space and the deep night at the burning and the burning of 10 billion white and lovely candles. And that was The Gift by Ray Bradbury. It's charming. It's the Christmas spirit. Isn't that lovely? I think it's lovely. Just heartwarming. Who needs cocoa when you got a story like The Gift by Ray Bradbury? That's what I ask you. And with that bit of cultural appropriation set aside and over and done with, I got a scoop. It's been a pleasure, folks. Merry Christmas to all, or whatever you celebrate. It doesn't matter. Whatever seasonal festivities are upon you, I wish you well in them. I hope you enjoy them as much as you can. Hopefully use this to emotionally fortify oneself for the oncoming storm. In my case, a literal storm. It is unbelievably dreary out right now. But other than that, and the fact that I have to worry about a flood, possible flooding, hope people are doing well. If you have other festive stories or any other requests, indeed, please shoot them my way. I don't know how you'll do that. Probably through my YouTube channel or something, like comment on the video, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, like if you've got, I don't know if there are any science fiction-y Hanukkah stories or Kwanzaa stories. I have no idea. If there are any, please shoot them my way. I want to know about it. If there's something with like a giant space station dreidel in it, I want to hear about it. Or a robo menorah. That'd be cool. I want one. In any case, hope people have a good one. Enjoy the season. Enjoy your families. Enjoy life. All right. I'll leave it at that. Have a good one, folks. Thanks for tuning in. See ya. Bye.